Ava. I'm the current researcher in residence at Metropolitan Workshop. I'm joined today by Dhruva, who's the head of research and practice innovation. And we'd both like to warmly welcome you to our second event associated with the practice's self-initiated annual research project, People-Powered Places. Our research project aims to critically examine innovative methods of community participation in planning and housing to enrich our work with new and existing communities. Our project will conclude in early 2022, and hopefully by the project close, we'll have prepared a very helpful practice guide for use within our practice at Metropolitan Workshop to better integrate processes and outcomes of community participation with our work as architects and urban designers. To help us in that task, we are holding a series of expert-led workshops, and today our focus is on social value. And we are joined by one of its pioneers, Nicola Bacon, who's the founding director of Social Life and has also been a key contributor to our recently published working paper. Social value is a contested concept, both in terms of its definition and how it's practically applied into life projects. So Nicola will first introduce social value as a concept, and later in conversation with our practice members, Michelle and Sean, will explain how a focus on social value can inspire and realize better design outcomes with and for communities through its integration into key project stages, such as briefing, planning, procurement, and also in use. We've selected one of our in-practice projects, Campbell Park North, as a scenario to help us apply social value to a real context. Many of the practice has visited the site at an away day in Milton Keynes, and the scenario offers us a useful means of exploring the challenges of applying social value to suburban settings where existing communities may be less established or readily apparent. We also have an invited guest, Tom Jarman, who is Director of Architecture at Urban Splash, the client of the project, and he will be offering his insight into social value from the client perspective. It's important to stress that for our purposes today, Campbell Park North serves as a scenario and is essentially a learning tool that will help us explore how to best approach social value in similar settings. It's a very complicated subject, so we'll see how far we can get. And to support us through this conversation, we have invited Mellis Haward, who's the director of Archio. Mellis is an architect with a growing reputation as both a curator and educator, and today we'll be sharing a flavor of her work undertaking participation in relation to the development of affordable housing through co-housing and community land trusts. The format that we have today will be around an hour of short presentations that will help orientate us to the topic and the case study project in broader terms. We'll then have a short break and we'll return at 1, where we'll attempt to apply the issue of social value to our scenario project. At around 1:30, we'll begin a panel discussion where we'll be kicking off with some observations from Mellis before opening up the discussion to questions from our colleagues. And after some summarizing words from Dhruv, we'll then end the session at 2 p.m. Lastly, as you all have seen in the recent emails, we'll be holding a focus group with around 6 colleagues to discuss what we've learned today in relation to our wider practice project. So please contact me or Dhruva if you'd like to be involved in that conversation. I'd also finally like to thank all our participants in advance, especially our invited guests for joining us today. I'd also really like to thank Dhruva, who's been really instrumental in pulling this whole event together. And now I'd like to hand over to Nicola, who's our facilitator for the session, for her opening presentation. Thank you.
Okay, hi, thank you, Ava, and thank you all for inviting me. I'm Nicola Bacon. I'm from Social Life, which is a small, mainly research, but also a sort of very practical consultancy. We're based in Elephant and Castle in London, and we do a lot of work on different schemes, some new build, a lot of area regeneration as well. So what I've been asked to talk about is some of our work on social value, and I'll now attempt to share my screen. Okay, is that working for you?
Yes.
Great, cool. Okay, so I've been asked to talk about what social value is, and I mean, as the note that's been Sean put together, that's been put out, really says, it's like social value is it's quite a new term. It's a term which many people have very different definitions of, very different emphasis. It's something that It can be contested, or it can just be people have different opinions and there are different ways of employing it. There are many consultancies, many organisations pushing different social value models. There are many academics working on this. It's a big, complicated thing. But what I want to talk about is some of the work that we've been doing using this and really trying to make sense of, for you very quickly, of how we've been working in the hope that this will help you think about your work in a different way. So what is social value? So we don't have a snappy quote yet about social value. So I quite like this one, which is about 10 years old. And it's from Jeff Mulgan, who is sort of very much a pioneer of sort of thinking about these concepts and very influential in our work. And he talks about social value very simply as being the wider non-financial impact of programs. So it's what you get that isn't monetized. For example, the impact on individual well-being, on social capital and area level physical environment. And so I find that really useful in terms of saying this isn't about money, this is about the other things. And our work at Social Life is very much, our strapline is that we work on the relationship between people and places. And so we're really interested in what it is about a place that affects people's quality of life and affects people's lived experience. So our work is partly about looking at the very tangible things that affect experience, about poverty or inequality or poor education, poor health, as well as sort of physical issues. But more than that, we think a lot about how people feel about the places they live in. We think about their sense of belonging. We think about their relationships, their neighbourliness, what it is that drives quality of life, what it is that affects quality of life, because we know that there is a really interesting relationship between physical problems of an area and how people actually thrive and get on. And in some places where actually circumstances seem very difficult, people's well-being can be quite high just because of the quality of the community, the quality of social relationships. So this is our particular take on social value, is very much thinking about these intangible things. It's like, what is it that changes in the built environment can do to affect our well-being and how we feel? And many people would agree with this. That isn't a particularly controversial concept. What I would say is that it is quite difficult in practice to think about how you focus on these intangibles. And people say, yeah, it's really, I can think about, as a planner, as a designer, I can think about the shape of things, I can think about the feel of things, I can think about environmental sustainability, but really is all this sort of social stuff to do with me? And I'd say, yes, it is, very much so. And there's a lot that can be learned about what can be done through the works of architects, designers, planners to actually affect all of these intangible things. And one tool we use is the concept of social sustainability, which is part of the sort of the overall kind of concept of sustainability as having a social and economic and environmental arms. And we use this framework to sort of underpin a lot of our work, and it's a way of bringing together sort of different concepts about amenities and social infrastructure, about people's sense of influence, about people's resilience, and about what we call social and cultural life, by which we mean people's sense of belonging, their fear of crime, all those kind of the perceptions of place. So we use that as a way to start off thinking about social value. And we've worked on quite a number of new schemes and different regeneration schemes. And yes, we see very clearly there can be a lot of social value in new housing development. So this is Woodbury Down in North London. There's, some controversy about Woodbury Down in that there are a lot of very kind of new, big, shiny blocks there. But also what Woodbury Down has brought in is this lovely new wetlands and a lot of very kind of well-used green space. It's brought in a new community centre that's run by a development trust that's really good at good at reaching out to the different sections of the community. And because of the way the partnership was set up between the residents' organisations and the developer and the local authority, there is a better deal, I think, in some ways for existing tenants on Woodbury than there is on a lot of regen schemes. So it's not that there are problems with Woodbury, but Woodbury, I think, is a case where you can say, yes, we can see tangible examples of social value that have been delivered through this new development. However, when we think about social value, it's value for who is a really important question, which I would say keep at the back of your mind throughout all your work. It's like, why are we doing this? So this is just behind where we work in Elephant and Castle. It's the Newington estate, which is a quite kind of functional low-rise estate, which is incrementally becoming overlooked by the Elephant and Castle towers. So we have different towers there, different landlords. We've got a social housing tower, which has been there for a long time, and different private towers. And there's something about the way that particular part of London, like many parts of London, is becoming developed, really brings to the fore, like when we redevelop an area, the impact of what is done within one development really literally, in this case, throws a shadow over the whole development. So what you do when you are thinking about social value within your work, within a particular site, is you need to think about, like, what is the knock-on of that? How does that affect the wider community? How does that affect wider areas? And it's also really important in the value for who to just think about who loses as well as who wins in changes in the physical environment. So this was a Colombian cafe in the Elephant and Castle shopping centre. Elephant and Castle shopping centre is now no more. It's being replaced. What was in Elephant and Castle was a very kind of teeming group of businesses and traders, a lot of social spaces, a lot of supports for particular communities. So the removal of that shopping centre means that these social spaces no longer exist. So there is a loss there in social value for the people who used to use this cafe, who used to use the different facilities there. So how do we measure social value? How do we think about social value in practice at Social Life? So we have one approach we use where we think about social value, the changes over time. Like, how can we look at a place and think about the changes in how people are experiencing the place, and from that try and get an understanding of the social impact of redevelopment. So we've worked on the South Acton estate now since for about 6 years, and we've just finished our third round of research there, looking at really using our social sustainability framework to look at what is the impact of change over time. And from that, you can see we can quantify things. We can get a nice kind of quite neat circles of strengths and weaknesses. And as you see, the number of greens in those is getting bigger over time, which shows that things are improving for residents in the remaining estate, as well as the residents in the new development. And in Acton Gardens, we do look at the neighbouring communities as well. So that's one way that we can look at social value. We also, on Woodbury Down, we did a rather different approach at looking at social value, where we talked to all the people involved in the regeneration project about what social value was for them. So this wheel, which is the Woodbury Down social value framework, which includes indicators about pride in place, about empowerment, about balanced communities, about prosperity and well-being, was something which was developed over time and through quite a lot of workshops with the residents organisation and Berkeley Homes and Hackney Council and Metropolitan Housing Trust and different other people working in the area and some residents. So this was a social value framework that was co-designed with the people who had a stake in the place. So that's a really interesting approach that, you know, we really enjoyed doing, and I think there's a lot of value in that. We also are thinking about how you measure social value, thinking about new developments, which are starting a bit like the site we're going to be thinking about later, from a sort of empty space. And how do we start thinking about a place that doesn't yet exist, where there isn't a community that is already in place? So we've just started working in Marley in Cambridge, North Cambridge, and we're starting there by looking at trying to really understand what is going on in these three neighbouring communities. So that's part of North Cambridge and 2 villages, and trying to understand the sort of what is going on there, what the development can contribute in terms of social value for those places. And so starting from now and going on over the next 10 years, we'll be working to try and get a sort of more incremental sense there. But what's the point of doing all this? Is that I've talked about quite a lot of research approaches, and there has to be a point in doing this. There has to be a value in measuring social value. And I think what we would say is, like, trying to look at social value through these very kind of people-focused concepts really makes us focus on lived experience. It makes us focus on how people on a day-to-day basis are using a place and are using facilities, what it is people need. And so it makes us think about people as well as infrastructure and buildings, and that's really important. This approach surfaces a lot of very ordinary and everyday things that support quality of life. So in some ways, the invisible assets of places, and that applies to places that haven't been built yet, as well as places that are built. And for places to succeed, we need to think about working with all the kind of positives that are there in purpose, there at the moment. All of our work is very much about generating practical lessons and learning for that particular scheme or site, but also for other projects. But also, I think critically, the value of measuring social value is that it really helps guide design, investment and planning to create places that work for people. And I think there is a lot of benefit in practices like yourself in really thinking about how you integrate this into your work. So that's me.
Thanks
Thank
so
you very
much,
Nicola.
Oh, go ahead, Dhruva.
No, Mellis, do you want me to? I'll load your presentation up.
Thank you. Yes.
Just say next clearly, be bossy.
Okay, will do. Will definitely. Well, thank you so much, Network and friends, for inviting me in today. My name's Mellis Haward, and I'm one of the 2 directors at Archio. And I've been asked to bring a sort of personal reflection on what social value means to us. And I think Nicola gave a perfect introduction, and hopefully I can kind of take us to some of the minutiae of how we try and deliver social value and better design outcomes through our design processes and for affordable housing. So to start very personally, this is Nano, and Nano is a community organiser in her 80s. She lives in Lewisham. She is really full of life and full of compassion. And she, when we first met her, she was full of the belief that she could make a difference to her area. And there she is holding the Local Heroes Award at the New London Architecture Awards. So next slide. We first met Nano at a Pick an Architect workshop, and this is her sitting watching what we're doing at a garage site in Lewisham. And this event was really the culmination of her campaign to get Lewisham Council to release public land for affordable housing. We were really excited by her tenacity, and we thought that her idea was full of potential for us as architects. And I think our enthusiasm won us the public vote in the project. And Nano's campaign group partnered with London Community Land Trust, you could stop there, Drew, to deliver genuinely affordable housing. And this, combined with having been chosen by the public, really changed the dynamic when we came to begin this project. So next slide. The residents understood that we were delivering homes for members of their community that would be genuinely affordable. And this awareness allowed us to welcome them into co-design solutions to unlock a really difficult site. And I think it's really rare that on the first day of designing a project, you're welcomed into neighbours' back gardens to have a look at the potential impact on the site. Next slide. So the scheme is sort of quite robust and ordinary in some senses, but it really had to be because it's being sold at 40% of market rate. But I think the moment that Nicola mentioned in her talk about voice and influence, and it was really in the landscape design that I think we had with many workshops and co-design sessions where we really got to the nub of the issue. And I think our kind of listening to people in their estate and understanding that what they didn't want was more grassy patches of unused kind of bits of green, and what they really wanted in their landscape was this really hard wearing place that was playful with water and kind of incidental play equipment. And so the landscape completely changed from our assumption of what it would want to be based on our professional experience. And here we are talking about real lived experience, really changing the design, improving it, and I think creating a better outcome for the residents. So if you go to the next slide. I think we can also see that the residents felt very strongly their own influence, and so much so that they took the planning application to the Mayor of Lewisham by hand. And we received 107 letters of support at planning, which were so many that the planning officer rang me to suggest that there might have been some kind of collusion, and we were nearly forced to withdraw the whole application, but luckily it was fine. And I think what this really highlights is one of the problems with housing design in the UK is that the structures in place really mean there's a danger that we don't engage with people. So that what we did was so extraordinary, we were in danger of having to do it again. And I think it's really possible to design a multi-unit housing scheme without ever speaking to an end user or gathering that lived experience. And we feel that by co-creating, working genuinely with communities to understand their problems, I think the projects we're designing are better and better able to solve the issues that they face, and also enables these communities to become advocates for the process. And if you go to the next slide. So last on Tuesday, we had a party with Tom Copley, the Deputy Mayor for Housing, and Nano again, to celebrate the work starting on site. And I think, well, the RIBA toolkit has 4 definitions of social value, and the one that I think we're really delivering here is about participation, supporting communities to help design and build their homes and neighbourhoods. And from a personal note, it was very rewarding to see Nano so proud that her idea is becoming a reality and that we've helped her and her community shape those designs. And if you go to the next slide, Drew. So I think, again, we're always trying to think, how can we participate really well? How can we deliver this social value outcome really genuinely and with real results? So we've been working in our office for a long time on a number of tools for engagement, whether it be digital, physical or hybrid. And I'm just going to pick one out, which seems quite sort of ordinary, but I think tells the story of our message. And if you go to the next slide, it's a project engagement plan. It's basically a flowchart of the programme up to the end of planning. But we feel that if we're really going to deliver social value as architects, we have to design how we engage and talk to people, as well as design the buildings. So we created this flow diagram of the planning process when we saw how residents on other projects were totally bamboozled by a kind of exhausting Gantt chart, trying to find their place within it. So we designed this way of talking about programme to enable them to understand their role in the project and how they would, when and how they would have chances to input. And I think, again, it really shifts the power dynamic from being a process done to them to one being done with them. And this particular flow diagram is for a co-housing project we've just started in Norwich. But actually, we do create these for projects that perhaps aren't at first glance community led. And if you go to the next slide. So we also created the programme like this for a project for Southwark Council. It's a 20-unit social rent homes project, part of a larger estate. And on the face of it, the project's really about designing new affordable homes. But through the process of working with residents on the estate, our focus has expanded to be working with them to find solutions to kind of wider antisocial behaviour issues and other things that blight the lives on their estate. So if you go to the next slide, over the last few months, we've been trialling some of the tools in our toolkit, including estate mapping and idea prioritisation. And if you go to the next slide, this is a drawing that's a summary of some of the conversations we've had and what we've learned from those conversations. So I think building empathy with residents and other people is helping us to deliver this maximum social impact. And really what we found is that we needed to be facilitators of a discussion, particularly between different ages, to help heal a bit of a rift that's going on the estate. So if you go to the next slide, we can zoom into some of the issues that came along. So, you know, obviously, first of all, we're listening, we're understanding that there are quite common issues to do with overcrowding and antisocial behaviour. So we engaged with Southwark Council for them to commit to having large enough second bedrooms on the units so that they could all be family-sized units. If you go to the next slide. We also heard about kind of small maintenance issues, like the gate to a car park to a neighbouring block had been vandalised, and it meant that lots of people were driving into the estate who were not from the estate, and so we're going to have bollards, etc., to stop this kind of what might seem like a really small thing that's having a really big impact. There's also issues of safety and noise across the estate, and so working with the landscape designers, we've kind of unpicked that and making small improvements in lighting and landscape in order to really make a significant difference to how people feel about walking through the estate. But actually, one of the most interesting moments, if you go to the next slide, was that we talked about this kind of issues of antisocial behaviour. But what we found is that the people who were coming to the sessions, the design sessions, were mostly older, and we were struggling to get young people to join the sessions. So we invited a group called the Southwark Young Advisors to join us to represent the voice of young people on this estate. And it was such a healthy debate about essentially how to nurture young people on this estate rather than push them away. And so perhaps at odds to what people thought would happen, we're now adding more seating to the football pitch and more lighting to enable the estate to be really well used by young people and to embrace them rather than to push them away. I think you could go to the next slide. And just to say that's the last view of the housing with a new playground in the foreground, which we're designing with the residents. I'm going to finish by just touching on some of the teaching we did, if you go to the next slide, at the Bartlett last year. I think it sort of typifies our attitude. So our brief for our students throughout the year is to design instruments to help start conversations and to help them become better listeners. And we partnered our teaching with Phoenix Community Housing Association in Lewisham because we wanted the students to practice the critical skill of talking and listening to real people. And the highlight of the year, just before lockdown, was this residents' review at their headquarters. And we were a little bit nervous about how it would go and what the residents would make of it. But of course, we were wrong to be nervous. And if you go to the next slide, the residents offered really, really precise and insightful and compassionate feedback. And I think that is what you get from having lived experience of a place. And many students said it was the highlight of their degree, and it was a really interesting day for us. So I'd say that our take on delivering social value is that by listening, by opening the conversation, we're building empathy, and it's helping us to deliver more impactful projects. And working with people who I've introduced you to, like Nano or some of the residents on Astley Estate or the critics from the Phoenix Housing, it really gives us the energy to do what we do and inspires us to help communities deliver the positive change that they're striving for. And that's me.
Thank you very much.